February 22nd, 1946. Texarkana, Texas-Arkansas border, 11:47 p.m. The night was still. Not peaceful, still. There is a difference. Peaceful nights carry the sound of crickets, the distant bark of a dog, the soft rustle of wind moving through pine trees. But this night carried nothing. The air along Richmond Road sat heavy and unmoving, as if the darkness itself had inhaled and refused to breathe out. A thin crescent moon hung low over the state line, casting just enough silver light to see the gravel road stretch forward into nothing. Just enough light to see, but not enough to feel safe. A young couple had parked their car along the roadside. Jimmy Hollis, 25 years old, and Mary Jean Larry, 19. They were ordinary people living ordinary lives in a town that sat on the invisible line between two states, a town so divided that it had two city halls, two police departments, two sets of laws. They had no reason to be afraid. Nobody in Texarkana did. Not yet. Not on this night. Not until the figure emerged from the tree line. He came from the darkness, wearing the darkness. A tall, broad shape moving with deliberate, unhurried steps across the gravel. His entire head was covered in a white cloth sack, rough and handmade, with two holes cut where his eyes should have been. Those eyes, invisible, unreadable, giving nothing, swept across the car with the mechanical patience of something that did not feel urgency because it had already decided what was going to happen next. Jimmy Hollis never had a chance to process what he was seeing before the first blow came down. What followed was not a robbery. Nothing was taken. No motive was left behind. No note, no symbol, no signature that investigators could name or categorize. Jimmy survived, barely, his skull fractured, his body left in the gravel like something discarded. Mary Jean survived too, traumatized beyond the capacity of 1946 medicine to fully measure or treat. She would describe the attacker to investigators in fragmented, shaking sentences. Tall, heavy, the mask, the silence, the way he moved. Not like a man in a panic, but like a man completing a task he had rehearsed 100 times inside his own mind. The Texarkana Police Department filed their report. The Miller County Sheriff's Office filed theirs. 2 jurisdictions, 2 filing cabinets, 1 case that was already beginning to slip through the cracks of a system that was never designed to catch something like this. And then, exactly 3 weeks later, he came back. March 24th, 1946, Richmond Road, 1 a.m. Richard Griffin and Polly Ann Moore were found in a parked car just miles from where Jimmy and Mary Jean had been left bleeding in the gravel. Richard Griffin had been shot once in the back of the head, execution style, precise, close range. Polly Ann Moore had been dragged from the car. What had been done to her in those final moments belonged to the category of horror that investigators of that era wrote in careful, clinical language designed to keep the full weight of it from reaching the public. The town of Texarkana did not yet know what it was living inside, but the darkness along Richmond Road knew it. It had been there both times. The Texas Rangers were called in. Captain Manuel Gonzaullas, known across the Southwest as Lone Wolf, arrived in Texarkana with the quiet authority of a man who had dismantled criminal operations across 3 states. He set up his command in the local hotel, pinned his maps, and began the methodical work of building a profile from almost nothing. No fingerprints, no weapon recovered, no witness who had seen the attacker's face. Only the mask, only the silence, only the pattern of a killer who attacked on weekends, targeted couples in parked cars, and left behind a crime scene so controlled it suggested not impulse, but practice. April 14th, 1946. Spring had arrived in Texarkana, but nobody felt it. Paul Martin, 16, and Betty Jo Booker, 15, had attended a musical performance that evening. Betty Jo played saxophone in the band. She was talented, bright, the kind of teenager whose future felt inevitable and large. By dawn, Paul Martin's body was found on a rural road, shot 4 times. Betty Jo Booker was found hours later, nearly a mile away in a field. She had been shot twice. The saxophone she had carried that night was never recovered. To this day, nobody knows why he took it. Nobody knows what it meant. And that absence of meaning, that void where a motive should exist, became the most terrifying thing about the phantom killer of Texarkana. Panic spread through the town like a fever with no cure. Hardware stores sold out of deadbolts and door chains within days. Gun shops reported the highest sales in their history. Movie theaters emptied early. The streets of Texarkana became a place where ordinary people drove with their windows up and doors locked, even in the middle of the afternoon. Lone Wolf Gonzaullas ordered spotlights mounted along the roads where the attacks had occurred. He deployed rangers in unmarked cars to sit in the darkness and wait. The FBI sent agents. The Arkansas State Police coordinated with Texas authorities across the state line. For the first time in its history, Texarkana had the full attention of American law enforcement, and it changed nothing. May 3rd, 1946. Virgil Starks, a 36-year-old farmer, was sitting in his farmhouse living room reading a newspaper when a bullet came through the window and killed him. His wife, Katie, ran to his side and was shot twice but survived, fleeing through a back door into the night, bleeding, screaming for help that eventually came. If he was willing to come to your home, if he was willing to stand in your yard and look through your window, then nowhere was safe. Not the roads, not the fields, not the farmhouse where you had lived your entire life. And then he stopped. No final confrontation, no arrest, no confession extracted under the pressure of a closing investigation. The phantom killer of Texarkana simply ceased to exist. A local man named Yule Swinney was investigated extensively. His wife claimed he had confessed to her in private, but she later recanted, and without her testimony, the case against him collapsed. Swinney was eventually imprisoned on unrelated charges and died without ever being formally charged with the phantom murders. The case was filed. The files were eventually archived. Texarkana rebuilt its sense of normalcy, the way traumatized communities always do, slowly, quietly, and with an unspoken agreement to look forward rather than back. The national press moved on to other stories. The FBI closed its active involvement. The Texas Rangers had other crimes waiting in other cities. And the phantom, whoever he truly was, whatever drove him to those roads and that farmhouse window, faded from the American consciousness like smoke dissolving into a night sky. But the families of Richard Griffin and Polly Ann Moore never forgot. The family of Betty Jo Booker, the 15-year-old girl who played saxophone and whose instrument was carried into the darkness, never forgot. Texarkana still sits on that state line today. 2 city halls, 2 police departments, 2 states sharing one sky, and somewhere in the unsolved archives of American criminal history, a case file sits with a question that has been open for nearly 80 years and may never be closed. The phantom was never caught, the mask was never found, and America forgot.